A while back, I made a video to Frank's voice, who is unfortunately no longer here with us on YouTube, and it was addressing the whole idea of Pascal's wager to be used in the context of providing a reason for believing in a god or gods. I'm pretty sure that I addressed it thoroughly enough, but at the same time, after a bit of contemplative thinking, I do have a few more things to add. But how about a quick recap of Pascal's wager? So it basically goes like this. If you believe in God and you happen to be right and that God does exist, then you gain everything. If you believe in God and you are wrong, then you lose nothing. If you don't believe in God and you're right, you don't really gain anything. And if you don't believe in God and you're wrong, well, in other words, you're fucked. So I guess the most obvious thing that can be seen is that Pascal's wager only takes into account one religion and one particular god. It does not take into account the fact that there are multiple religions on this earth. So essentially, if you believe in something and you're wrong, you can still get fucked over. Considering, for example, if you believe in Thor and it turns out that the Judeo Christian god was the one that existed, then yeah, you can kiss your ass goodbye because you'll be spending eternity in hellfire. Of course, the first statement of if you believe in God and you're right, then you gain everything is flawed in its own merits. Not logically, but there are a few things to consider here. For example, let's just say you do believe in the right God. Does that mean that you really do gain everything? Not really, or at least not from what I've heard from the majority of theists. Taking, for example, Christians. Do all Christians go to heaven? Or at least do all people who believe in the Judeo Christian God go to heaven? Not when I last checked, not according to Christian doctrine, and not according to the majority of Christians I've heard from. But let's just say that that is the case, that everyone who believes in this particular God, which happens to be the right God, gains eternal reward. Well, then I really see this whole wager as completely moot, considering how the standard of which this particular God uses to differentiate between those who gain eternal punishment and those who gain eternal reward is just essentially who happens to pick the right God at the right time. And it's not even that fair. It's not a fair game of chance either, because certain people are separated by geological borders which essentially prevent them from picking the right God to begin with. So really, this whole first part of Pascal's wager is essentially completely and utterly botched. So let's look at the other end of the spectrum. If you are a non-believer and you're wrong, well, then you lose everything. Well, yeah, I can't argue with that. But again, this whole wager lies on the premise that only one religion exists, and only one God of that one religion exists, and no denominations of that religion exist to begin with. So essentially, yeah, if you're a non-believer, sorry man, you picked the wrong god out of the 30,000 that exist. You rolled snake eyes on the game of life, and you're fucked. So have fun in hell, motherfucker. On the other hand, though, if you are a non-believer and you happen to be right, you don't really gain anything is, of course, a fallacious statement on many accounts. But the strongest thing I have against the statement is, well, of course we gain something. We gain, in many instances, time, money, and effort that would be spent in better places that might improve the condition of our world instead of wasting it on just something that isn't even real. And you might think of me as being extremely petty about this, but when you consider all the time, money, and resources that we've spent with religion, and even just for a second step out into an objective view, if objectively you consider all of the time, money, and resources used on religion, then it will come as no surprise that we really do gain something if we're right. So not only is Pascal's wager flawed in its premises, but it's also self-refuting. Here's an example. Let's just say a Christian decides to use Pascal's wager against an atheist. Well, okay, let's assume that each and every single one of those premises happen not to be flawed in the ways that I've already outlined. then a Muslim can come along and use that same Pascal's wager against the Christian and sound equally as credible. Then a Shintaoist can come along and use Pascal's wager against both the Muslim and the Christian and sound equally as credible as the previous two, and so on and so on and so on. And you know what? This proves that Pascal's wager, in terms of logic and reason and rationale, is a complete and utter bullshit argument. So when theists really attempt to use Pascal's wager against an atheist or maybe a rival theist, you really have to consider that they're holding a double standard, and a fairly large one at that, if they are using this argument and expect to be taken seriously, while at the same time they would just scoff at other people who use this exact same argument, but with a different God in question. And essentially, when theists use this argument against each other, it really boils down to just a long, meandering way of one theist saying, oh, well, my God has a bigger dick than your God. How typical. Pascal's wager essentially puts forth a case, or at least a reason why people should believe in a God. But really, who just believes in a God these days? Believers don't just generally believe in a God, they tend to follow what their God says. They tend to do what's instructed of them. So, okay, believers don't tend to be just believers, they tend to be followers as well. Well, what does this have to do with Pascal's wager? Well, essentially, my way of refuting Pascal's wager once and for all is just to up the ante. Because believers don't just tend to believe, they follow, right? So let's just swap out the belief part out of Pascal's wager and put something a little more exciting, like, I don't know, strapping a bomb onto your chest and blowing up a building. So, if you do strap a bomb onto your chest and blow up a building because you thought God told you to do so, and you happen to be right, then you gain everything. If you strap a bomb onto your chest and blow up a building and God actually didn't tell you to do so, then you lose nothing. If you don't strap a bomb onto your chest and you were right that God wasn't the one that told you to strap a bomb onto your chest, then you don't really gain anything. But if you don't strap a bomb onto your chest and it was actually that God told you to strap a bomb onto your chest, then you essentially lose everything. Ah, now you see what's wrong with Pascal's wager, don't you? Because last I checked, if you think that God told you to strap a bomb onto your chest and hijack a plane and ram it into a building, and you were wrong about that, you don't exactly lose nothing there, do you? You not only kill yourself, but essentially everyone else around you. So hopefully I didn't ramble on for too long, and hopefully you guys understood why I find Pascal's wager absurd. And if you don't, well, God help you. No pun intended. Thanks for watching, and may the truth always be heard.